Hello, my name is Allison Boyer. I am a professor at BYU. I teach freshman writing and creative writing, and I'm excited to talk to you today about one of my favorite works of Gothic literature, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So, one of my greatest sadnesses is that this book has actually become so well known that everybody knows the twist ending, and if I had a time machine, I would love to go back in time and watch somebody read this for the first time, not knowing the twist. Not knowing before they read it that at the end, Jekyll and Hyde are the same person. In our society, that we all know the ending, we know the story very well. The term Jekyll and Hyde has become a phrase that we all understand as something that refers to a split between good and evil, or even between two different personalities, usually opposite ones. But today what I want to talk about is I want to talk about how this book came to be, not just the story behind it, but the psychology of the writer and how that understanding can influence our understanding of the book itself. So, let's talk about this. In 1885, Robert Louis Stevenson woke up from a nightmare. According to an account from his wife in his biography, she says, "In the small hours of one morning, I was awakened by cries of horror from Louis. Thinking he had a nightmare, I awakened him. He said angrily, 'Why did you wake me? I was dreaming a fine bogey tale.' I had awakened him at the first transformation scene." So, the story behind the inception of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's story is this dream that Stevenson had, this spooky dream, and he feverishly wrote it down at a time where he was not feeling well. He wrote it over the course of several days, revised it a little bit longer after that. The story was published in 1886 and was considered a moral allegory due to circumstances at the time, and because of that moral connection, it became very popular and has remained popular. It's remained a prime example of Victorian Gothic writing, using those Gothic elements of the melodramatic literary devices, atmosphere of fear and mystery and dread, the supernatural elements, and the sublime, large, terrifying concepts. But it's remained that. And so the story has remained popular to no one's surprise. But there's still more into this that deserves an examination. This dream didn't come out of nowhere. So Stevenson himself deserves a little bit of explanation here, a little bit more of a dive into his past. So Robert Louis Stevenson was born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1850. He was sickly as a child, which explains these health problems that would come later. But beyond that, and it also explains that why he spent a lot of time in a room with a cabinet, a wardrobe made by one William Brodie. So, a little bit of background on Edinburgh. Edinburgh in Scotland, at the time of Stevenson's life, was a place that was torn in two. There was the new town, which was the respectable, richer side of the city that had been recently built. It was where you would expect to find the higher class, the morally and socially upright. And then there's the old town, which was the seedier, more impoverished side. So already we see a duality in Stevenson's life. And then I mentioned that there was a wardrobe in Robert Louis Stevenson's room, that was made by Deacon William Brodie. So William Brodie, was a cabinet maker, tradesguild deacon, and a city councillor in Edinburgh. He was also, however, a housebreaker and a thief, and he funded a double life of gambling and mistresses with the money that he gained from his thievery. He was finally captured and hanged in 1788, and Stevenson was so taken with the story that he actually wrote a play about him called The Double Life, where he explores this double life. So we see that already happening in Stevenson's life as he's growing up next to this furniture made by this man who lives double life in this town that has this split personality. Duality was something that would have been familiar to Stevenson between the old and the new towns, but also with stories like Eugene Chanchel, an Edinburgh French teacher who was convicted of murdering his wife in 1878. So once again, we have a respectable teacher who's doing some kind of horrible crime. We can see his interest in duality in these plays like The Double Life and even his story The Body Snatcher, but we can also see it in books that are more familiar, like Treasure Island, where the character of Long John Silver is on one hand a murderous pirate, but on the other hand is very likable, very pleasant, and when he vanishes at the end of the story, the other characters are okay with that because they didn't really want to deal with him anyway, with that duality in mind. So duality is a major theme in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I don't think that needs to be said too much. But we often see it as a duality of good and evil. And when you explore it a little bit more, there is good and evil, but there's also a little bit more of this concept of the shadow and the self, the duality between the shadow and the self. So in Jungian psychology, the self refers to what we believe we are, our personality, who we are. This is who we are. This is what we show the world. This is our persona. Although I don't think I was using persona correctly in the Jungian way, so don't hold me to that. But that's our identity. The shadow, on the other hand, that's the part of our identity in the shadows. It's the part that we are unconscious of, or we've repressed. We don't want to be conscious of that part of ourselves. And you see where I'm getting at this with Jekyll and Hyde. So in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Jekyll never refers to himself as the good one. He's the composite. He's the whole person. Every element of the self. So the good that he sees, the person he portrays himself as to society, as well as the shadow. Hyde is the shadow given form. He's the unconscious elements of Jekyll's psyche. He's the dual nature there. So the person that Jekyll is trying to be for society, and then there's Hyde, the part of himself that he's ashamed of, the part of himself that wants to engage in these wicked and immoral acts without any kind of guilt, and is able to go and do that in that persona, as the shadow. In this story, Jekyll he's the main self, and Hyde is the shadow. There's a duality between who Jekyll is and who he portrays himself to the world, who he sees himself as, and the shameful side of himself that he gives free rein as Hyde. So there's a hypocrisy there, and that has not gone unnoticed by a lot of scholars. But there's this duality. And in horror, the horror comes when we start applying death and fear to things that we are, as humans, are uncomfortable with. And we are all uncomfortable with parts of ourselves, things that we are ashamed of ourselves for, thoughts that we have, actions that we have. So with Jekyll, he is in a situation where, as Hyde, he's free to do whatever he wants. He can go out and he can live this double life. He can express himself through this duality. But there's a catch. The more he does this, the more strength he gives that shadow side of him, and the more the shadow becomes the real self. Now, the shadow is the part of himself that he's afraid of, the part of himself that he's ashamed of. And as this shadow grows, the self that he portrays to the world, this respectable, good person who lives a moral, respectable, upstanding life, fades. He's dying. His shadow is growing, but he is dying. And his shadow is a being that is willing to commit murders and is not safe to be. So the horror comes when Jekyll is no longer safe in living a double life, when that double life threatens his main life. So as a moral allegory, we talk about the story is a moral allegory. Good and evil it's there, the story is there, the allegory is there, but perhaps it can be read as an allegory between the self and the shadow, the person that we portray to the world, as well as the darkness inside us that we are desperately hoping does not come out. So, the reading of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, thank you very much. Have a great day.